It's the Central Weekly, a weekly podcast from the Central Podcast Network. We've got Jon and Jared
and Jared the Crone. There he
in
is.
the podcast studios for episode 57. Are we going to do aha at the top?
Listen. What does that sound like? What flavor? You can see it.
I see a cherry and I see a blueberry.
No,
that would be
disgusting. A man who doesn't
though.
know his fruits, evidently. No, all right off the gate. I'm going to give you one more chance. Here it is.
Aha.
All right. What does that sound like to you? Does it sound like
blueberry passion fruit?
That's a blueberry pomegranate.
Aha!
Right there. All right, welcome to the show.
Hey, and if this is your first episode of the Central Weekly, we talk about seltzer water, sparkling water at the top or in the episode.
Don't get me going. I could talk about that for a long time because I have strong preferences.
We're going to continue a series within a series within a series because not only are we looking at a credible account week number 5 of the series, we're also going to be joined with our 5th missionary / mission that Central supports. And this week we have Keturah Richison from, ready? Casas por Cristo.
Yeah.
Like that?
Houses
with
for Christ,
accent.
right?
And we're excited about this conversation. Keturah is on the development. She's a development coordinator at Casas por Cristo, and it is a great conversation. She talks about just her love for missions, how she got involved with missions. She goes personal with this because this is such a personal thing when you're investing your life into building houses for people that need it. And she's got some crazy statistics, but some really great stories as well. I'm excited about this. Yeah. And Keturah is kind of a local girl. She's Southern Illinois. She grew in Mount Carmel, Illinois. Not to be confused with Mount Vernon, which is where we're at right now.
It's different, right.
So, but here, before we get into that conversation.
Sounds more delicious. If I was going to eat something, I would much rather have a caramel than a Vernon.
Oh, Vernon that sounds like something at your grandma's house.
It's a ginger ale. Verner's.
Really?
Verner's?
I'm not a ginger ale guy. Okay. I think that's more of a Northeastern thing.
Either way.
Okay. Here, before we talk more about things in a can, let's get into David and Goliath, week number 5, a credible account. It was a great, we've all heard a lot about David and Goliath, but I thought the insights you brought were really good.
Thanks, Jared. For a change.
To be honest.
Finally.
But here's the thing.
Some sort of good insights
But
here.
before we get into the sermon, let's talk about the string of jokes that you assaulted our ears with. I think, is that strong enough?
It was hard to settle the room. The room was uproarious laughter. So, for starters, let's shout out to the Central Congregation, 3,071 pair of socks.
That's what it was, yes.
For Salty Farm Ministries.
Yep.
Which is huge. That's a big deal.
It's pretty cool. I saw Rochelle loading all that up and getting all that because she was going to take it down there to herself because she was here, of course, in Southern Illinois and going back to the beach. And it's just, gosh, how cool is that they can walk around, have these relationships that they're forming and say, hey, I have something from you that some people gave me to give you. And I hope they feel special. I hope those are used. And it's super cool to be alongside that. And that really started here on the Central Weekly. We had the conversation with Rochelle and JL Dunahee. They said about the need. I said, hey, it'd be cool if we just donated socks. Bing, bam, boom. James talked to James, got John. Boom. Here we go. 3,000 pairs of socks.
3,071 pairs of socks.
That's how the church steps up and provides for needs. So then, we talked about that really high point, and then we went really low with the jokes.
I thought it was witty and smart to say that even though it was only a 2-week drive, it could have been the longest thing we've ever done because it was over 6,000 feet.
You're telling the jokes again, John.
It was so good. Yeah. I feel like, no, it's all right. So David and Goliath, here we go.
And it really was, because I was, even on social media, we were trying to be as punny as we could. Just because we know that the people like the puns.
People like the puns.
People like the jokes. Yeah. It sets, and James has figured that out too. It lets people just sit back, relax, and listen to what God has in store for them.
Hopefully it's disarming. It's ice breaking.
That's a good point. It's disarming, especially if you're new to church, which we've had a lot of new people. And if you're like, I don't know about this church thing, and then you do what you do on stage to start things off, people are like, oh, okay. This is not going.
Thank goodness this dude is just an actual nerd.
So let's go into this. 3 main points. But gosh, you had this. So many just really good quotes that you could take off, and I didn't get a chance to write them all down. So, but here's number 1. There are problems even in the promised land. And I loved how you kept saying the land of what?
Ella.
And I love that it's not spelled the same, but I just love you saying Ella.
It's not, and honestly, I thought maybe it was Elah or something
Nope,
like that.
it's straight up.
But it's straight up Ella,
Yeah.
for sure. So at the Valley of Ella
With an H.
is where they, one on one side, one on the other side, the Israelite army, the Philistine army, standing, at a standoff.
Yep.
And so, I think the irony here is that the Philistine people are a remnant still left over in the land of Canaan that God's, for 40 years, the Israelites wandered the wilderness waiting for the day they could go into the promised land. And if you do you remember when Joshua and Caleb, when they went and spied on the land, they said, "Oh, it's a land of there's giants there and all this kind of stuff." Goliath, a giant here, so this kind of all stands to reason. But this undefeated people in the promised land, that now all of a sudden, by no surprise, there's a problem at hand.
Yeah, and that's a thing that we need to realize. When we're in the center of God's will, we're doing His calling, we're in His promised land, there will still be hard times. And some of that really is maybe a thing that we didn't, do and clean up in our past life. I can imagine things that hey, you've had an old life and that's washed away. God has made you brand new, but there's still some temptations that follow you into those. And if you haven't properly taken care of those, put those boundaries in place in your new life, that giant's going to come back.
That's good. That's interesting for sure.
Point 4B. No, but it really was, and it was neat that this was you set the stage with the two armies, and we look at David, and David, this is his promised. He knows he's going to be king, and let's go into point number 2. Faith formed before the fight gives us different perspective.
Yeah, different perspective for the fight, and really, David looked at the situation differently than anybody else there.
Yeah.
He had a faith that was well established before he got to the moment. Sometimes when we wait until the point of need, it's too little too late, right? You can't develop it like that.
Yeah.
You don't just instantly develop a deep rooted faith in your life. It has to grow, right? I talked about my friend Lauren.
You've done that story before, right?
I've never
or
told
is it just for me?
You and I have talked about it before.
Steroids. And again, the Central Christian Church is not a proponent of steroids.
No, right. It was this moment where I remember it. He's like, don't worry, dude, I've got this. Steroids. As if he could pop, like it was some sort of a magic pill that he could pop right before the fight and watch out, dude. Yeah. And so anyways, that's not how it works. David had a faith in God at this moment because he'd walked with God well before this moment. He believed God could do amazing things because he'd witnessed God do improbable things many, many other times, even with, the lion and the bear and fights like that. Because he had seen victories in those situations, he was confident God could do that and more again.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. And what was Trevor when we talked about this sermon, what did Trevor say about character? You remember that when he said?
It's very similar to our character, right?
Yeah.
You can't just all of a sudden be a person of integrity. It's just it's developed. All of those deep things in our life, our faith walk, our integrity, all those things that contribute to our character are developed over time. We talked about that a little bit last week in the sense of developed in the dark, what's plotted in the light.
Yeah. And I think it was really good because a lot of people need to understand that there are things, and that's a crazy thing. God has seen them through so much, and if you're not aware, and sometimes we're just not aware of those past things because we don't really give God the glory for getting us through those a lot of times. David, at this time, he's anointed king, and we talked about this earlier too, but it's probably just a family thing. Right. I don't think Saul would have said, "Here, use my armor, future king of Israel, taking my spot soon." Right. But yet he knew that, and he knew God anointed him for something. So that gave him a holy confidence going into that. When he saw that this giant across the way that wants to annihilate, or annihilate, I can't even say it now. He wants to get rid of, wipe them from the earth. He knows that, hey, God's behind me on this. This isn't something I'm going at, but it's something I'm also been preparing for. And I think that's got to be the connect. I mean, it's 40 days of doing this. Goliath's taunting the Israelites for 40 days, and he's going back. David's going back and forth, bringing his brother's lunch.
Yeah.
So he's hearing this,
Yep.
and it's probably just festering. And he's like, "Why aren't they doing anything? Why am I going to have to be the one to do something about this?"
Right.
And he's like, "Wait, this is something I'm prepared to do. I have fought giants by myself in the wilderness while protecting people. I can do the same thing here."
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many ways you could go with this as well. Also, I think that David probably has some of that naive confidence.
Naivete.
Exactly. Some of that accompanies his age. And a lot of times people say exactly what Saul said. You're just a boy. You're like, that confidence is nice, but the people with experience,
Get real, young man.
The people with experience know you're going to go out there and get killed, But I think this is also, I mean, we don't talk about it in the sermon, but I think it's a lesson at sometimes like that, that the confidence that hasn't been cut down by failure before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the stuff that somebody new to ministry or new to the church or just in general new to the faith says, like God can do this, God can do this. Sometimes the experienced people are going to say like, "Hey, well, slow your horses, dude." I mean, like this is how it really is, or whatever. But often, that is actually a godly thing. It's a God kind of faith.
Yeah, and because what's the verse? Young men will dream dreams, and older men will have visions.
Yeah,
and I think that's a purpose thing. Those dreams are given to those young men because they can do something about those dreams. Because, like you said, there's a naivete faith, but that's a positive thing we're looking at because we said, "Hell, God's done this for me before, and He's never let me down. I'm going to conquer this giant." And here's the thing, too, though. So David and Goliath, the little match, basically what Goliath is proposing, that is, if you beat me, you will become, or our people will become your slaves,
right?
Vice versa. So do you think the Israelite army was grateful that David was going to do this? Or were they like, "Oh my gosh, we're about to be annihilated"?
Nice. That's a good question.
Because or was it like he ran out there with you got an army chasing behind him? No, don't do it. Because they could not. I don't think they would think that this is going to happen.
I mean, it went through the right structure, right? I mean, it went to the king
knew
first.
About it.
So I mean, he sent him out, and I think over a month into this standoff, Saul is like, we're gonna have to do something.
Yeah.
And nobody who's here is willing to step forward. So I've got this dude who is, maybe he dies, but he's willing to do it. So go ahead.
Number 3, real faith leads to real action.
That's true. True for 500.
I'll take that. And that's the thing. I told you this earlier. I loved you have a well-balanced lesson here in the fact that you tell us that we'll have troubles, but yet God has seen us through it. And then there's a call to action because all of this, knowing all of that should lead us to action. I love how you said we pray at the end, we pray for opportunities and a willingness. And that's exactly what we should be doing. David probably didn't pray that giants would come his way, but he knew that God was going to give him opportunities and he needed to be willing to step up and be tested. Because that's the thing, our faith is going to be tested really if we're going to be prepared for it or not. But it's through the being prepared for it and that's what develops us as a person and develops our character and everything we said.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's is faith really faith if you don't act because of it?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that Scripture would argue not, right? I mean, like your faith is probably not genuine if it doesn't drive you to any action.
Yeah.
It's
a verb.
Oh, faith is a verb. That's love is a verb from DC Talk, rewritten on the spot. So anyways.
90s.
So basically, bottom line, end of the story. One, we all have things that God needs to develop, or that we need to develop, so that it's ready when God calls us to use it. Right? We all have things that we need to do in that regard. We will all face giants in our life. We're all going to see things that like seem insurmountable, right? But just because there's a giant in the land doesn't mean that it's not where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's not a discouraging moment. That is the moment where we should see as like, okay, this is where like a David-like faith needs to rise up. That no matter what we face, we would, confidently step forward and address the giant, not with our own power, not with the sword and shield, but in the name of the Lord.
Yeah, it's neat that this is happening. Most people are going to watch this the week leading into, or listen to this the week leading into Easter. And it really just going into this Easter time, not so much us in the Protestant world, but it's hard. These weeks leading up are meant to remind us of what was going on in the New Testament, Palm Sunday and then Good Friday. And it really does remind me of the disciples. At this point where after the garden, Jesus has been arrested and their faith is being tested, maybe for one of the first time, right? That in real detail. Yes, they've gone into the world, they've probably faced some troubles, but not like what they're going to face in the future. And when we look at Peter's example, and he picks up his sword and he's ready to fight, but he's not really ready to put his faith behind his fight. He's ready to just try to do it all on his own. And I think there's so much for us to remember that God is going to be with us in it. So we don't have to be trying to do things by ourselves. David was anointed. He was doing that with God behind him or beside him, in him. Yeah. And I think that's a thing for us to be encouraged by and to have the faith to move mountains and to fight giants and any other figurative thing you want to put in there because God is with us.
Yeah. Right. It's good.
There you go.
Good job. It's true.
So here's the thing. Next week, I think we're going to talk about, I can't remember what it was. Easter. The resurrection. And so credible account, week 6, is going to be the resurrection.
Right.
And we're going to look at Jesus, and we're going to celebrate Easter together. And so next, stick around because we're going to have a conversation with Keturah Richison. She's the development coordinator at Casas por Cristo. I told her that we're very fluent in Spanish.
Really?
And I do most of the interview in Spanish, so that's a lie. This is a super good conversation. We hope that you are encouraged yet again by how God is moving in the lives of people that are telling people and serving people in the name of Jesus. And Casa por Cristo is another one of those great missions. So don't go anywhere. Jon, don't go anywhere.
Okay.
We'll be right back with Keturah, not with Jon, right after this. And we're back with the Central Weekly, and we're continuing our series within a series looking at missions and missionaries that Central and the Central family support. So we have a special guest, Keturah Richison. She is the development coordinator at Casas por Cristo, and I'm going to struggle with that the whole time. But Keturah, say hi.
Hi. Hello, everybody.
Keturah, we're excited. You are our 5th person to be in this, and it's been really exciting. It's been this is something I look forward to every week, is getting to know the missions that Central supports and see what God is doing around the world. So because here in Mount Vernon, we can get so streamlined on here's what's just right in front of us, and our giving goes around the world, and we're really excited to hear about where it goes south of the border and how Casas por Cristo is really opening the doors for local pastors. And this is theirs. This is not my words. Exists to open the doors for local pastors and churches to share the love of Jesus Christ by serving. So, and before we get started, we've got a shared history. You are a Mount Carmel girl, correct?
Yes.
Southern Illinois. Is that Southern Illinois? Do you consider that Southern Illinois?
Yeah, it's definitely Southern Illinois.
Okay. Because I get confused when you get on that border with Indiana, because you play a lot of Indiana teams in your divisions, right?
Yeah, we were in a full Indiana division when I was in high school, and I think they still play a ton of Indiana teams.
And I think they're still like a football powerhouse, but
yes,
we can talk a lot about Mount Carmel and Mount Vernon, but we won't. But we share a little bit of history because we went to school, Christian colleges, about the same time. I know your older sister Roberta pretty well, and Travis Sanders, and they really right from college went right into this mission, correct?
Yeah, right after college, they moved down to El Paso and have been working there for the most part ever since.
Okay. Yeah. So we kind of have that shared history. I know you went to Lincoln. I went to St. Louis, and that's where Roberta and I met. And I think it was really neat because you Richardson girls, were just always such a bright rays of sunshine around the campus. Because I know you were visiting your sister a lot at St. Louis. So it's really neat to kind of see a full circle 15-year moment. Makes me feel old, though. So, Roberta, before we get into Casas por Cristo, there you go, rolling my R's, let's learn a little bit more about you as the development coordinator so we can kind of break the ice. Are you ready?
Ready.
Here's rapid fire with Keturah Richison. What is your favorite food?
My favorite food is homemade noodles from any culture. So I like even like the local Midwestern homemade noodles, Asian homemade noodles, Italian homemade pastas, all of it.
Does the Mexican, do they have noodles in their diet?
No, but they do homemade tortillas, and we do have those on our meal plan. They're excellent. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask the locals is how many tortillas they eat a day, because it's a lot.
Yeah. Favorite vacation spot?
Anything in nature. So either the beach, mountain, something outside all day, playing all day long. I like them both.
Now, person that you identify with most in the Bible?
This is a tricky question. I would have to say, I read a book called The Gospel of Ruth, and it talks about Ruth as a rule breaker the whole time. And I personally am a rule breaker. So I don't know that I relate to Ruth. And I mean, she went through a lot and had a much tougher life than I've had, but I do relate in the very much like a trailblazer, rule breaker type persona.
You get a day to yourself. What do you do?
I like to be outside. I do work behind a computer a lot of days. So anything in the sunshine. And if I could do all kinds of exercises all day long, like yoga in the morning, volleyball all day, tennis all day, run in the evening, that's my favorite type of day.
That reminds me, you were a volleyball player growing up, weren't you?
I played some volleyball. Gymnastics was my favorite sport growing up, and did softball through high school as well.
Yep. It's funny because you remind me of R. Brooke Peninsky, which I don't think you know any idea who that is. But yeah, people, when they see you, they'll understand who I'm talking about. And here's the next thing. Biggest fear for Keturah Richison?
Biggest fear. I am like, my silly fears are, I am very scared of dogs, which really rubs people the wrong way, because people
Everly is the same way.
But as a runner, I get chased, and I'm not kidding, at least once a month. And so I'm pretty terrified of them, and they can make me cry. And also shots. Those are like my biggest, I just am not a normal person around
You sound like my 8-year-old. I don't know how you want to take that. But
yeah.
It's funny because people do take it personal. If you don't like dogs, people take it personal.
And it's not personal. I'm just scared.
Two more favorites. Favorite moment growing up. Maybe just a favorite childhood moment you want to share with us.
Yeah, I would say my parents took us to the beach almost every summer. And so really just beach days with my family, being out there playing in the sun and enjoying one another. Those are some of my favorite childhood memories for sure.
So don't give too much away what we're going to talk about later, but what is your favorite moment with Casas? Here we go again. Favorite moment with Casas por Cristo?
Yeah, so my favorite moment since being on staff, we had one of our builds that I was on the final day. And every time we finish a build, we do this dedication ceremony where we pray over the family, pray over the house. The local pastor comes out and shares the gospel in Spanish. Our team really pours their love and encouragement out on the family during that time. And so one of the builds I was on, and this has not happened since, and is the only time I've ever seen it happen. But right before we showed up, the mom had given her life to Christ. And so we were there kind of really excited just to get to love on her and her newfound faith. And she had a husband and 5 kids that lived with her still. 2 of her kids in her 20s each also had a kid. And so they had a full house. Yeah. And during the dedication ceremony, when we were sharing the gospel with this family, my coworker asked, "Hey, does anyone want to receive Christ?" Which they ask this every dedication ceremony, but in this one in particular, her 5 kids all raised their hand at the same time and decided to follow Jesus. So that was really exciting. We don't always get to see that long-term fruit, but to get to see it in that moment was just really special, and for sure my favorite memory since coming on staff.
Well, Keturah, you did a good job with rapid fire. You're off the hot seat. So those are the hard questions. Now you just get to talk business for you. And it's neat because with Casas por Cristo, this is a relatively, it's been around for a while, but it's a relatively new mission for the Central family as in support. I think like just within 2022, you guys got things, it's funny, negotiated with James. Am I right on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm excited for people to know a new mission relatively to us. But yeah, take us back. Tell us a little bit about the mission, how it started, and kind of take us to where it is now.
Yeah, so we started in 1993, and it was kind of birthed out of this family that went down, and they were talking to the pastors and how could we bring teams into Juarez, Mexico, which is where we started at, and actually be a blessing to these families. And on our border, we have people from all across Latin America that are flooding up to the border trying to get across. And a lot of them get stuck there. They have limited resources. They have very limited community to help support them. And a lot of companies come in and put factories there and get really cheap labor out of these people that are in need. And so we were looking at that situation and, how could we come down and do something for these families? And what the pastor said was, if you could alleviate that burden of housing, that would free them up to actually use their finances to help their families out a lot. And it would make a difference in their lives and in this poverty cycle that they kind of live in. And so that's kind of how our ministry was initially birthed. And then we have a pastor's committee that does those long-term discipleship relationships, chooses which families will receive the homes, and kind of follows up with them and continues sharing the gospel with them after we come in and get to serve and build a home for them in the short term.
I really like this organization because it's not like, okay, here comes the white Americans up from north to build you a home and say, bye, you enjoy your home. This is you're working with the local pastors, and the local pastors are the ones that kind of decide the need, and go from there. Am I right on that?
Yeah. So our pastors, we completely leave it up to them for which families will receive homes. Because like you said, we don't want to be the missionaries that are like, you need to do ministry in your context that you're very aware of in this way whenever we are the outsiders. And we just want to be a tool for them in the ministry that they're already doing. We definitely encourage them to use it as an outreach tool. And so I've had pastors say, hey, I chose this family because they live down the road from us and we noticed their living conditions are unacceptable. We don't have a relationship with these people. So maybe that will open the door, which is awesome. And our team gets a video of the family before they come down and build, of the family saying why they're excited, but also that local pastor saying why they chose the family, how you can come alongside and pray with the pastor for that family. And so we come in and pray with them like, hey, let this home be an open door for sharing the gospel. But then I've also had a pastor choose a family because, hey, this family's in our church. I know this couple has had a ton of marital issues. They have 2 teenage daughters. Their living conditions are unacceptable. So let's gift them a home so that these teenage girls never doubt the goodness of God. And so we come in alongside him and pray for the family in that way with him. So whatever the pastor's goal is with that build is also our goal.
That's so cool. I think it's really neat to know too that in all of our stories over the last 5 weeks, it's a mission has sprouted up and has seen a really big need, like a gaping hole that people really, and it's really neat that as Christ followers, we're able to fulfill that need. And this is one thing that is almost like it's a globally known need, especially with our border crisis and what goes on in El Paso and everything there. So it's like, hey, let's not just be the church that points our fingers and says this needs to change, but let's get our hands dirty and do something about it. And I love this concept that it's, hey, you have mission trips of a lot of people around this English speaking world, North America type thing. And I know you'll get into more about this, but just doing the serving so then the local people can do the evangelistic work. Mm-hmm. And so let me back up a little bit with your history. So Keturah, tell us how you got started, because I think Maria, my wife, she's done some mission trips as well, crossing the border similar to you and a similar timeline around 2004. Am I right?
Yeah, that probably would have been my first build, is around 2004, 2003. I was only 14. I was going into my freshman year of high school, and my home church has always done this trip since the 90s with the high schoolers. And so my parents put me on the church van bus and said, "Hey, this will be really good for you." And they were right. So my first build was really eye-opening. I mean, drove across the country, got to see a lot. My first time out of the country. And I'd say the first thing that was really eye-opening for me was that was the first time I'd ever seen real poverty. Mount Carmel's very similar to Mount Vernon, and a lot of nice people and decent homes and working class people. And it's pretty nice, really. Overall, you don't see a ton of poverty. And so getting to see true poverty for the first time was eye-opening in the way that that is for people. And then the second thing that really changed my perspectives and shifts for me was that at 14, I grew up going to Oil Belt. I went to a Christian school through fourth grade. My parents read the Bible to me every night until I could read it for myself. So by 14, I really do feel like I had a pretty good grasp on scripture and the gospel. But in order to live that out in my context, it was like, be nice to kids at school, obey your parents, be nice to your siblings. And I looked at scripture and I was like, I know that being a Christian is more than being nice, but I just didn't have any way to live that out or see that for myself. And so going down and crossing the border, and during that dedication ceremony where we reminded that family that was living in poverty, like, God sees you in your need and he loves you, and getting to gift them a home with that. I thought, this is what the gospel is really all about. It's about putting action to your faith, going to the ends of the earth, and making sure that people know that they are loved by Christ and they are loved by me. And so that kind of changed my life. I mean, it's the week I decided, like, oh, mission work is what I will do for the rest of my life. This makes sense to me. And started to really analyze, okay, how has God gifted me and wired me to make a difference in the global kingdom and really let people know that they are loved by him? So yeah, very life-changing for me.
I want people to know more about what your mission work and TESOL. Because I don't think that's something a lot of people know about, that's actually something as Christ followers, we could really make a big difference. So tell us about that TESOL program and how that made an impact for mission work.
Yeah. So initially, whenever I was in high school and trying to figure out, what should I do in the kingdom, I really loved Spanish class. It was my favorite class in school. And I love the language learning process as a whole. I was not fluent in Spanish. And so I was like, I don't know how I would use that really in kingdom work. And, but enjoying the language learning process, I knew that we do have tons of internationals that come into the States, lots of refugees that could benefit from someone going out of their way to teach English to them. And so I ended up getting my certificate in that in undergrad and my grad degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages. And so I got to work for years in a couple different universities, working with international students. We had refugees in there as well. And it really is a special opportunity to get to show the love of Christ to people coming from all across the globe. Internationals in any context. And I've been an international, so I'm aware of, like, even from my perspective, like, I was very needy when I was overseas. Everything is different. How you bank is different. How you pay your phone bill is different. How all these things that are very second nature to us that you grew up learning, all of a sudden you don't know how to do basic tasks. So to get to be in someone's life and help give them the tools to function in society. And they are very needy, very fun. And it just is a very unique relationship that you get to build with internationals when you say yes to showing up in their lives and helping them with whatever they need. And it's a really cool opportunity, to share Christ with people. And I got to see a lot of fruit from even working in secular universities, of students coming to Christ, students coming in my office saying, like, hey, I think for the first time over Christmas break, I had an experience where I think maybe there is a God, and maybe he does have a plan for me. And maybe that's why you're my advisor. Maybe this is, and just to get to hear those stories and be a small part of other people's stories is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Back to Casas por Cristo. Again, struggling with that. Here's the thing. I'm going to be upfront. Spanish in high school, I was a C student. That was the best I could do. And then I would get to college, and I was going for a BA, so I had to get a language. And they always schedule Greek at 7:30 in the morning. Nobody's going to learn Greek at 7:30 more. And we only did it twice a week. So it was like, this is not. And so I dropped it my freshman year because it was bringing down my GPA and I had to keep my GPA high. And then my second year, so I admire people that are fluid in other languages. I just admire it because I know it's something my mind just can't do unless the Holy Spirit wants to just intervene on that, which he hasn't yet. So
yeah, that's okay. Some people are more geared towards language learning. You're probably way more right-brained, and I am not a creative, and that's a beautiful thing. I wish I had more of it. So we all have our giftedness. So
let's talk about serving, because this is what this organization does. So tell us a little bit about the structure, how the staff is made up. I know because basically it's almost self-supported missionary families that are doing the work under the umbrella. Am I right with that?
Yeah, all of our missionaries on staff are support-based except for our executive director because he does a ton of fundraising for us as an organization. So he's the only one who's not support-based with their salary. The rest of us are. I think there are 30 some missionary families on our staff, and it might be even a little bit more right now. We've had some hiring because we were growing, which is exciting. We just opened up our Honduras location. We'll be accepting teams there this summer. So lots of new staff going around the globe right now as well. But yeah, we are all support-based. A lot of us have dual roles where we'll have an office role and a building role. I am one of the few people who is not a building staff. Most people do both and they lead teams in the builds. I'm one of the worst builders on staff, but then also our development team, we travel. I'm on the road or in other countries about half the year. So that is a lot of time out and about to also on top of that be building with teams. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of our staff will have like an office role, but then they're also out building maybe up to 14 weeks during the year. And they are the ones who would meet a team either on the Texas side of the border or pick you up from an airport in our more Central American locations. And they are with you the entire week, splitting teams up. Hey, we need this many people for cut crew, this many people for concrete. And they will teach you the whole process of the build, start to finish, be with you the entire week. But yeah, that's kind of how we run as a ministry. And we are a short-term trip missions organization. And so I think that is unique. And a lot of times when you go on trips, missionaries are really pulled out of their main focus for the week to help accommodate, where this is all we do. And we love getting to do it.
Yeah, I would think a lot of people, especially our age and younger, really don't know what that concept of short-term mission trip work is anymore. Just because of COVID, it really shut the world down. So there wasn't traveling. And some people can be a little on the negative side when it comes to short-term missions because they're like, oh, well, but here's the thing. Casas por Cristo is doing it differently, like you said, where it's not the pastor doesn't have to stop everything that he's doing to direct a whole team. This is the definition of we're going to get our hands dirty. And by doing so, people get to know about the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think, short-term mission trips can get a bad rap. And whenever you think of like, okay, we are called to live out Matthew 28 and go to the nations. We're called to live out, Acts 1:8, like all these missional verses that are taking us to the ends of the earth and loving on people. And so how can we do that effectively with a group of people who don't have language, culture, or evangelism training? And so this really, I feel like, is one of the best. And I studied missions in undergrad as well. And so whenever you think like, how can we actually do something effective in a short amount of time? I love what we get to do. And I know I've been on mission trips where I'm painting a wall a day, I'm delousing kids a day, I'm doing a VBS in a language I don't speak. And I think God is really good and can use all of those things for his glory despite our deficiencies. But to get to come in and from start to finish, our teams, they've raised funds for this family. They've sacrificed their time and vacation and finances for this family. They've been praying for this family. And then you get to go into that country. And for 1 week, you just get to love on that family as hard as you can and serve them in a very grand way. And our homes are not super extravagant or anything like that, but they're about 400 something square feet. They do have a concrete foundation, which they say even taking a family from a dirt floor to a concrete foundation can add about 20 years onto their life expectancy, which when you see the living conditions, you will understand why. I think especially in the Dominican, I'm always shocked to see their dirt floor homes just because that's a tropical environment. You guys are getting tropical thunderstorms coming through, and I don't know how you manage your floors turning into mud monthly. Just things that we really can't understand. But so that makes a huge difference. On our border, we have a completely sealed home with insulation, drywall, stucco, because it does, like that Texas freeze that messed up the power grid a couple years ago. We're just a few hours south of that in Acuña, Mexico. Our families there are also freezing, and they don't have adequate housing to keep them warm throughout the winters. I think in Juarez, they have over 50 people freeze to death every winter.
Wow.
And that's not including the people that are just miserably cold throughout the winter time there. I mean, we think of it being, they need shelter from the extreme heat in the summers, but really the winters are worse for them there. So really these homes are just this huge blessing in these families' lives. And on average, our families make about $60 a week. And that, they've got large families, they're Hispanic, large families typically. And to provide food and water and clothes and education, there just is almost nothing left over for adequate housing. And so they'll use whatever scraps they can find to make a shelter out of it of sorts. And so that's where in 1 week, we get to bring these teams in, pour love out on these families, give them adequate housing with, floors, siding, a roof that's going to stay on, and it's not going to leak whenever it rains. It's going to keep the wind out. We've got fans in there, and it ends up being a really nice home for these families, especially whenever you see the comparison. And it does make a difference in these lives of the families. And I know our executive director was out on a site recently and building for a lady who, when she was a little girl, her mom had received a home. And so she did too when she was a child. And now she was receiving a second home. But she said because her mom received a home, she was able to go to university. She was getting ready to take her first career position in one of the factories, so not on the line, which will provide a much better life for them. And she was planning on sending her kids to college. And so you can see how generationally it really helps out, just freeing up that housing budget for these families and getting to love on them in that way. And then we want that house to really represent that free gift of the gospel that Jesus gives us. And so some of our numbers on how that's kind of affected our ministry, which I'm really hoping for 2022, we get our numbers back here before long and we have good tracking for that. But in an average year, we'll build around 300 homes. And so 2019, our last really good tracking year for all of this stuff, we built just under 300 homes for that year. From those families that received the 300 homes, we had over 500 commitments to Christ. We had over 600 new church members for the local pastors. And then on average, which this is my favorite thing that we track, one house equals 1.8 baptisms. And so it's incredible to me that you can bring a group of really unskilled people in, willing to give their time and energy and finances to bless a family. And it just makes a huge impact in the kingdom. And we get to see that play out with our pastors and hearing stories from them constantly of the life change that comes with these homes.
I'm super glad for our congregation and more people to hear this story because, like you said, when it comes to short-term mission trips, they broaden your perspective on how other people in our world live. And when you're a Christ follower, you have to have that as an undercurrent when you pray, when you do your life. So, because I think too few, and COVID was a big thing, we really focused on ourselves even more, and things got closed down. And so we need to have a renewing of a global viewpoint for other people and to see how they live. And that's a couple things there. It's been really neat. We've, as a Central family, have started doing bed builds with a local organization, just making sure there's no kids in our community that are, sleeping on the floor. And again, it's very similar because it's a short term. You get together for a couple hours on a Saturday and you make beds. A lot of those people are unskilled at making those beds. Some of those guys are going to hate that I said that about them. But I'm not talking about the guys that are leading. I'm talking about the families that come in. But it's and then bringing that bed into those homes, seeing how other people live, seeing poverty in your face, and providing for that need. And Casas por Cristo is doing that on a bigger scale. And again, I love that this is a newer partnership with Central, because I know James, I know Trevor now with our missions. This is an important mission for us because it's closer. And we want to start short-term mission trips again. We want people to see other people around the world and to do something about it in Jesus' name. So we're excited. It's neat to know, hey, we're having this conversation in March of 2023. And, a couple of years from now, what does this relationship look like? What people are going to be impacted by this organization, impacted by those local pastors, impacted by those stories of this family. And I'm so glad that you've been able to share a lot of these really good stories. So give us a little bit of the locations. You've thrown a couple countries out there. Tell us a little bit about where the main camp, El Paso, and then go from there.
Yeah, so we started in Juarez, Mexico in 1993, just across from the border from El Paso, Texas. And then really when the violence, and I'm sure everyone that rings off so many alarm bells for people, the violence hit in 2007, 2008-ish timeframe. And we were able to continue building during that time. We've never had an issue with the violence. We have built over 6,000 houses as a ministry since then, and never one time had any issues with our teams. And that kind of
the Lord's favor.
Yeah, people are always asking, is it safe? Yes, we take good care of you. We have very specific rules for each location to keep you safe, and good relationships with the local communities, and nobody messes with us in that way. But we started there, and when the violence hit, even though we weren't having issues with it from our end, obviously the security rate was lifted to, level 5 or something, and people were not feeling safe coming. And so we were having way fewer teams come down and join us during that time. So we were really strategizing, how can we shift? How can we still continue to do what God has called us to do in these communities? And so we ended up reaching out into Acuña, Mexico, which is one of the safest border towns that there is. It's 3 hours south of San Antonio, Texas. And really what we initially saw as that setback, God used to set us up to continue expanding like only He does. And so now we are also in the Dominican Republic, in Guatemala. We have a presence in Nicaragua, but we are currently only accepting funds to build homes with our local pastors committee there because of the political situation. So as a praying church, if you could be praying for the political situation to shift there eventually, we would love to get back in and serve that community. And then we are also, like I said, opening up our Honduras location this year, which is exciting. And you can be praying for our team there, getting things off the ground. It's a lot to launch a new location.
So continue that a little bit for us. How, as we as a church family, how could we be praying? What could we be doing on our end?
Yeah, consistently just praying for the hearts of the families that we're building for. We can do all we want, but if God's not going before us, it's pretty meaningless. And He's the only one who can truly change people's hearts and shift them towards Him. And so just be praying constantly for our families in that way. For me personally, you can constantly be praying. My main role is recruitment. I go to a lot of conferences and I travel to cities and take 1 million meetings in a day with churches and drop off goodie bags. So just be praying that God continually networks me in with the right people and connects me with the right people where our ministry is going to be a gift for them and vice versa. And then lastly, the big last main chunk of our ministry is our teams that come down. And what we pray over our teams, and what you can be praying with us in that, is that everyone who comes on a trip with us leaves more in love with Jesus and more ready to go home and serve other people. And it is amazing to see what these trips do in the hearts of people who catch that missions service bug by coming down and seeing that, hey, I can make a difference and there is work for me in the kingdom.
That's super cool. And I think, too, it's important for us to know how we can learn more about this organization. Tell us, what's the best place?
Yeah, so I personally put out a newsletter if you want to send it to Jared or James or Trevor. They can get me your email address and I can add you to my newsletter list. That goes out about 4 times a year, and it gives you some of the main updates with our ministry and also with me personally, and the stories that I've gotten to witness by going on our builds. And then you can follow us on social media. We've got everything's like at Casas por Cristo. We've got a website, we've got a blog, we've got a YouTube that has a lot of great videos. We've got video people on staff. Yeah. Our creative team is awesome. We've got Instagram, Facebook, any kind of social media that you're on, we have, and we're putting out content. And it gives a lot of, this week, and even I am not in our main office, so I'm constantly like, hey, that's awesome, by following all of our stuff. I know this week we're doing 17 houses. Spring break is a busy time for us. So just be praying for all those people receiving homes this week. It's exciting. So follow along all over the place, and we'd love to keep you in the loop.
And I'll put those social handles on our episode description. So I think that's it for the mission. I think we're going to wrap things up. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to wrap things up like we do for every guest on the Central Weekly. Keturah Richison, we're going to ask you the question, how has God been working in your life lately? But we're going to take a quick break, take a breather, and we'll be right back. And we're back to wrap up our conversation with Keturah Richison with Casas por Cristo. I'm getting better at that R. So here's the deal. This is the question. Keturah, how has God been working in your life lately?
Yeah, so I'd say the things that I feel like the Lord has been teaching me, I like to read a lot of, Christian and theology books and different things like that. And so some of the consistent themes, and those are the things that I'm like, okay, like, what are you trying to share with me? Because this keeps popping up for me I read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's a really popular book right now, but it was really good. And just like that slowing down and working hard to like get in the presence of God and really enjoying the simple things and seeing God in the simple things and giving him space to speak into your life and that kind of thing. So that's something that I feel like has been consistent. And then I'm also reading another book on prayer that has been like really pushing the same kinds of things. So I'm like, okay, God, what do you have for me here? Because clearly this keeps coming up. And then I think with that, one of the things I read recently that really stood out to me was that, and I haven't like super looked into this. So that, again, I just like read this, but it was that in the Old Testament, every time we read the word obey, the Hebrew word for that is actually shema, which is this to listen and to hear. And so it kind of ties into these things I've been like consistently hearing that, like, I don't know, in a relationship with the Lord, it's not this, hey, do this and follow this. And there needs to be a lot more space for true relationship and listening and hearing and living that out. And so those are kinds of the things, I guess, that the Lord has been stirring in my heart lately that I've been trying to listen to better and figure out what he has for me in that and do a better job of, taking quiet sunset walks and being in his presence and that kind of thing. So
I love that God is teaching you through language and words, even just the simple word of obey. Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Well, Keturah, anything else you want to share with our listeners about Casas por Cristo or yourself?
No, I don't think so. Other than I do want to just say thank you guys. I would not be able to get to focus on such a cool thing day in and day out and be doing a really neat kingdom work like I get to do without partnerships like you guys. And you are making a difference around the globe. Your generosity makes a difference. Your faithfulness to Christ is making a difference, and it makes a difference in my life specifically. And so thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're grateful to do this alongside you, this work that is so essential in telling people about the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And next week is Easter. And so this is the perfect Easter conversation to have. And maybe you're listening to this before or after Easter here. And we're grateful for conversations like this, where we can tell the stories of what God is doing, not just here in Mount Vernon, not just in Mount Carmel, Illinois, but also around the world in different people's lives. So Keturah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I appreciate it. Thanks, Central.
Thanks so much again for joining us for the Central Weekly. Jon, Keturah did a great job. One more testimony down and one more inspirational testimony down too.
Yeah, again, it's a great thing to know, these ministries that are out there, putting real action to their faith and allowing that to be displayed in a way that makes a difference in the lives of real people.
Yeah, because I think she mentions it, I mentioned it, but it really did. Short-term missions really was a formative part of my faith growing up, and I think it could be for a lot of people too. And I'm really anxious to see what God has in store with Central and Casas por Cristo in the future, and see how we can help, even physically, boots on the ground.
For sure.
Or maybe some tennis shoes. I think you have to wear boots. If you're building a house, you better wear boots.
You would think.
Yeah. So that's it. We'll see you next week as we celebrate Easter and the resurrection and have our final missionary, the Edwards family. We can't wait. Invite someone to watch with you. If that's the whole thing, we'll do that. We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.